Well, the debate between Houston and Alabama takes another sharp turn as the Crimson Tide fall to Tennessee on Wednesday evening. What does this mean for Nate Oates' squad as we inch closer and closer to March?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up? Welcome to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton, and down goes Bama. It was an insane day of college basketball on Wednesday evening. The 4 p.m. slot or 7 p.m. Eastern time slot was absolutely bananas. We had Alabama and Tennessee. We'll talk about that game here in the first segment. We had Xavier and Marquette, which was a fantastic, super exciting game of Big East basketball. We're going to talk about that later in the show as well. And then, as if that wasn't enough, we all had to turn our attention to Virginia, who nearly got upset by the worst Power 5 team to almost ever exist, at least in the Ken Pom era. The Louisville Cardinals nearly upset Virginia. It came down to the final seconds, couldn't pull out a victory there. So, of course, we're still going to talk about the biggest story. That would have been a huge story, but the biggest story of the day is the number one team in the country, the Crimson Tide, who just took back over the mantle as number one from Purdue, the Boilermakers, who had lost 2 out of 3 games to Indiana and then to Northwestern. Bama takes over the mantle. We knew that they were going to have a really, really tough time going to Tennessee and defeating Rick Barnes' squad. They were unable to do so. It was a close game in the first half, 29-29 at halftime. Then Tennessee kind of jumped out to an early lead in the second half and just never really let Alabama get back into the game. That's what they do. This is a fantastic defensive team, and they showed it in this game here against Bama. We'll talk a little bit more about what this means for Tennessee, but first, for Bama, this is a challenge. This is a struggling game for them to have. We knew, again, that the defense was going to be an issue for them, but they had 2 scoring droughts in the second half of 3 minutes. They went just about 3 minutes without scoring, and then they hit a 3-pointer, and then they went about 2.5 minutes without scoring again. You're not going to be able to do that against teams like Tennessee, and that's what they are out there to do. They're out there to slow you down, to force you to take bad shots, to turn you over. And Tennessee went out and executed the game plan that they wanted to execute here. I think the biggest thing for Bama in terms of if you want to have a negative take from this game going forward, the guard play was really rough. And that's kind of been the Achilles heel for Alabama a lot this season, is when they have struggles, when they have bad games, it's not usually because Brandon Miller has a bad game, although, he's prone to do that, but it's because the veteran guards didn't step up. And that's what we saw in this game. Mark Sears had 2 points on 1 of 6 shooting. He was 0 of 3 from deep. He did not contribute to this team offensively. And that was a huge issue. He had 3 turnovers, which isn't horrible necessarily, but wasn't distributing the ball all that well. 3 assists, 3 turnovers, only 1 rebound, just kind of didn't have a significant impact on this game. And then you look at Javon Quinterly. Quinterly came off the bench, 3 points, 1 of 5 shooting, and 6 turnovers. 6 of Alabama's, 19 turnovers in this game. That's what Tennessee sets out to do. They want you to cough the ball up, give them the ball, let them get out in transition, get some buckets that way. Tennessee struggled to get out in transition, but Alabama just kept coughing the basketball up. And that was the biggest story of this game. Neither team shot well. Both teams shot around 36% in this game, but Tennessee got up 15 more shots than Alabama by virtue of getting more turnovers, turning the ball over. And I think that kind of tells you what Alabama needs to work on. Again, you don't face many teams like Tennessee. There's a reason that Ken Pom has them as the number one defensive team in the country, but it was still the kind of game that Alabama really needed to win to solidify their spot as the number one team in the country. Now they head into next week where it's up in the air again. We know which 3 teams it's going to be between. It's going to be between Houston, it's going to be between Purdue, and it's going to be between Alabama. My guess, and I think the guess of many other people right now, is that the Houston Cougars are going to be the number one team in the country on Monday when the AP poll comes out. There are still games to be played between now and then. Houston has to play SMU on the road, and then they get Memphis at home. Memphis is the best team that they're going to play in the American Conference all season long. They still got 2 games against them left this year, but they got the home game on Sunday. SMU on the road should be a game they take care of. Assuming they win those 2 games, they'll be the number 1 team in the country. Beyond that, I think Alabama and Purdue will still be 2 and 3, and I think that the order will kind of be determined by how the rest of the games go this week. Alabama's got 1 more game this week. They're playing Georgia at home. That should be an easy victory. If it is not, if they either lose or even if it is a close game, that might be enough for Bama to drop all the way down to number 3. Again, this depends how Purdue does. Purdue still got 2 games left this week. They're going on the road to take on Maryland, and then they host Ohio State. Neither of those teams are ranked, but they're both quality opponents for Matt Painter's squad. So it feels like we have a clear delineation right now where we have 3 top-tier teams. We have 3 or 4 teams kind of behind them, Kansas, Texas, UCLA, sort of all in that conversation. I think Tennessee, despite having a pretty rough week last week, has now kind of climbed back into that conversation. You tend to do that when you beat the number 1 team in the country. But to me, those 3 teams are number 1, number 2, and number 3. It's not that I don't care what order you put them in, but I do think that it's easier to look at it in terms of tiers as opposed to looking at it in terms of like, well, that team should be 1 and that team should be 2. They're all very, very good teams, but they're also all flawed teams. There aren't any flawless teams in college basketball this year. This is not like 2021 when everybody said, well, the Gonzaga and Baylor are going to be the 2 teams playing for the national championship. Everybody said that in February, and then that's what ended up happening. We don't have that situation this year. And this game, while it was not exactly a tremendous upset, I think Tennessee was even favored going into this game, it's still proof that anything can happen. And Alabama is not impervious to this kind of game. They're still a fantastic team. They should not drop below 2 or 3 at the very lowest. And I believe that firmly. And I think that they're going to be on the 1 seed when we get into March, and they have as good a chance of anybody as going to an Elite 8 to a Final 4. But they have some issues. Tennessee, who is as good at any team in the country at exploiting another team's weaknesses, they did it. They proved it on Wednesday. They showed what can happen when you put a lot of pressure on Alabama's guards, you force them to cough the ball up, and you make them take tough shots. And all of a sudden, you can hold this team to under 60 points like they did on Wednesday night, and you can secure a victory. So am I concerned about Alabama long-term? Not necessarily. I think that they've shown that they have some weaknesses, but they weren't exactly new weaknesses. They weren't things we didn't already know about this team, and it's not like these weaknesses were exploited by a bad team. When the best defensive team in the country is able to get you to have an off night offensively, I don't think that's something that you should be overly concerned about going forward. But I do think that it's proof that Alabama has some work that they need to do if they want to make it to Houston to play for a Final 4. For Tennessee, I think this is a great win for them. They needed it. Rick Barnes really, really needed it after a rough week that they had last week. I think this is the kind of win that potentially bumps you up a seed if they're right on the 3-4 line when the NCAA when the selection committee is kind of taking a look. They might get a little bit of a boost because they beat Alabama. I think that's the kind of thing that helps them. But ultimately, Tennessee's issues remain on the offensive end, and this game didn't do anything to kind of sway those concerns. They still shot 36.5% from the field. They went 6 of 23 from deep. That's 23%. I'm still concerned about Tennessee's offense, and anybody who watched this game and isn't, I don't know what to tell you. This was not a good offensive performance from them. They really struggled on that end of the floor. Santiago Vescovi, Zakai Ziegler had fine games. They made 6 combined threes between the 2 of them, which means not a single other player for Tennessee made an outside shot. They both had 15 points to lead the team. But there's still not enough outside of those 2 guys for Tennessee to really kind of move the needle. I know that they were dealing with some injuries, and I think that is a factor to be down a guy and still go out and secure a victory against the number 1 team in the country. That is exciting, and that is optimism for Tennessee. But I don't think that them winning this game is the kind of thing that's like, oh, they're back and they're going to be a top 5 team for the rest of the season, and they're going to go into the Elite 8 or anything like that. I think that this is a good win for a team that needed to have a good win. They needed it. They went out and got it. Alabama doesn't crush them that much, but it's no fun to lose a game like this, especially when you're in contention for the number 1 seed or number 1 team in the AP poll. Well, a battle of top-seeded Big East teams resulted in a last-second win for Marquette. Are they the best team in the Big East? And should Shaka Smart be in consideration for Coach of the Year? All of that coming up soon. But first, today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back for if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Maybe you're feeling a big win for Milwaukee over Chicago this evening. Maybe you like the Suns with Kevin Durant at home against the Clippers. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get the no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, I am joined by our resident Big East expert, Matt St. Jean of Road to the Garden, who is here to help break down the battle that was the Xavier Marquette game on Wednesday evening. Matt, between this game, between Creighton and Providence, between DePaul and St. John's, I got to ask, man, how's your blood pressure right now?
This is just life at this time of year in the Big East. It's the way it goes. Like I've had to tell my girlfriend, like, hey, like just during the week, you're not gonna be able to reach me at night. It's just gonna be a whole lot of this for the next couple of weeks.
Yep.
And it's every year too. Mm-hmm. Every year this happens.
Yeah, it feels like it's been particularly, I mean, I've been paying more attention to the Big East this year than I have in the past. So maybe it's just my welcome party to the conference, but every single game has just been fantastic. I know that Isaac and Leaf covered the Creighton Providence game really extensively on Wednesday's episode of the show and talked about the overtime and everything that happened there. But, you know, I circled this Marquette Xavier game here on the calendar as like, this is going to be some really, really good basketball. And boy, howdy, did we get some really, really good basketball. What a performance from Marquette here. They shot 38% from the field. Xavier shot over 50, close to 54%. Way better shooting percentage for Xavier in this game, but Marquette, 15 offensive rebounds, including that one from Iguodaro at the end of the game, the tip-in that ended the game, secured a victory for the Golden Eagles. It felt to me like Marquette really had a plan here. They executed their game plan exceptionally. We know Xavier's a very, very talented team. They were a little bit banged up. They had some injuries with Zach Fremantle, some other stuff that was kind of going on, but they led for huge chunks of this game, and Marquette just chipped away and chipped away and chipped away, and eventually, of course, secured themselves a victory. Did you kind of just feel like it was a coaching clinic here from Shaka Smart, or what did you see that kind of led to a victory here for Marquette?
I think it's just the ability of his guys to stay focused and not get overwhelmed in a situation. I think this was a coaching clinic in terms of preparation and player development, and not in terms of some kind of schematic stuff. It's one of those games like Xavier does that to teams. Xavier did that at UConn earlier this season. They blitzed them right out of the gate. They got guys who can hit shots. They're one of the best three-point shooting teams in the country. The way they spread the floor is incredible. You can play good defense, and Xavier can get a 12-0 run on you in 2 minutes. Like that just happens when you play them. So I think this was a preparation thing. Marquette hung in there knowing that Xavier was going to do that, and eventually the shots were going to stop falling, and they were going to start to come back. And then you get into the close game, and then you get the X's and O's, and it comes down to not boxing out on a putback on a shot late in the game, which we see so often as kind of the deciding thing. Like if you can, everybody tries to defend the initial shot because you don't want to lose the game on that, and people get out of position. And Omax Prosper comes up and gets that dunk with, I don't know, a second and change there, and that does it. So these teams are incredibly close, incredibly well matched. I don't know what it says for Marquette that this game was so close when Xavier was this banged up. Yeah, but a win is a win. It counts all the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing that's really stood out to me kind of about the Big East in general, in particular with these teams, is just the play of the guards. And we've talked about Tyler Kolek a handful of times on the show, and he didn't have a particularly great shooting performance. As we mentioned, not really anybody on Marquette had a particularly good shooting performance, but he was kind of the steady presence for this team all game long, finishes with 15 points, finishes with 8 rebounds, which is always something you love to see, had 5 assists in this one as well. Can you just talk a little bit about his performance and kind of how much he influences what Marquette is able to do, and really, at least in my mind, influences how far this team goes when they get in the NCAA tournament? It's going to be dictated by how Kolek can do, controlling the offense, dictating the pace of the team. And it feels like this was another example of him, you know, maybe not having his sharpest game as a shooter, but still being able to do enough to really kind of lead the Golden Eagles to a victory.
Yeah, I mean, he's the conductor of the train that is the Marquette Golden Eagles this year. He sets everything in motion. And I think his life is made a little bit easier by how good the players are around him. But
Sure.
he's also one of the few guys that puts up numbers like that. And I think his vision to see the court, his ability to place passes, his ability in transition to get things going too. He sees the game so well, and it just makes life that much easier for every single player around him. The way they all feed off of one another, and Kolek is the engine that makes it all go. So guard play wins in March. One guard playing well can win you games and make you a lot of money for your school in the tournament. And he's the type of guy who can do that. We've seen him when he scores, he is one of the best players in the country because you have to defend the pass so much against him that creates these lanes. And both games of his against Providence, the Friars had no idea how to stop him. He was shooting in both of them, and he had a couple of big baskets tonight that I thought were huge, just in helping them chip away. It wasn't his best night, but he still got a couple big ones in there. And I think you look at the two guards in this one, Sule Boom, Tyler Kolek, those are probably both going to be first team All Big East. Both of them are in Big East Player of the Year contention. I think Kolek is going to get that slight edge right now, but you could go either way. And you mentioned the Providence Creighton game that we just watched. That game is Ryan Nemhard for Creighton, and it has Devin Carter and Noah Locke for Providence. Carter in particular is a guy who's been fantastic. And all four of these teams, we knew the bigs were good coming into the season. Now the guards have emerged, and I think that's what set them all apart. It's why they're top 25 teams.
Well, speaking of Creighton, that's the Golden Eagles' next game. They're playing them on Tuesday on the road. Really, really tough matchup. As we know, Creighton has been playing some extremely good basketball after kind of struggling earlier in the season with some injuries. That's the biggest game for Marquette left on the calendar. After that, they got DePaul, they got Butler, they got St. John's. I'm not saying that those are guaranteed victories. I don't think there is a guaranteed victory in the Big East this year, or at least not necessarily one in those out of those four games there. But if we assume that Marquette can get by Creighton, again, not an easy task. If they're able to do that, does it feel like this team is destined to be the Big East regular season champion? When they were picked to finish 9th before the season, is it feeling like we're kind of trending towards, especially after this game against Xavier, are we trending towards Marquette being the team hoisting the regular season title for the Big East?
Oh, absolutely. They're in the driver's seat for it right now. They're the only team with 3 losses in the Big East. So they don't even have, they can lose that one and still end up winning the Big East regular season. So they have that buffer. If they win that one, the top 4 teams in the Big East right now are all undefeated at home in conference play here. So kind of the first one to crack, that could be what ends up deciding it. And that's where that game on Tuesday is going to be all about. Can Creighton continue this streak? Because if they do, then we might be looking at a 4-way tie for first place in a couple of weeks here. We'll just have to see what happens. As things are, Marquette has, like, they're in the driver's seat. They control their destiny. They got to do some really difficult things to actually make that happen.
And just about every team's got a lot of difficult stuff to do. That's the nature of the conference right now. Kind of staying on that note a little bit with talking about Shaka Smart and the job that he has done for Marquette this year, a team projected, like we said, to not even be anywhere close to the top half of the conference standings for the Big East, and to be in the position there are now where they're, probably going to be a top 10 team next week. Most likely, at least, they're going to be in that conversation and have been right in that conversation all year long, number 11, as we're talking right now after beating Xavier. And Matt Painter's probably the front runner for Coach of the Year right now out of Purdue because of the job that they have done and being an unranked team to begin the season. Certainly Kelvin Sampson at Houston is going to be in the conversation. Nate Oates probably a little less so now after losing to Tennessee. But do you think that Shaka Smart is in that conversation, or do you think that he should be in that conversation? I mean, this is a team that, again, really didn't have a lot of expectations, and to be in the spot that they're at now, it feels like that's, you want coaches who are doing jobs like that to be a part of that conversation. Do you think that he's getting enough attention nationally for the job he's doing as the head coach at Marquette?
Absolutely not. And right now he's a shoe-in for Big East Coach of the Year as long as things continue down the path they've gone. As long as nothing crazy happens over the next 2.5 weeks here, he's done an exceptional job. The fact that he's doing it all from the inside, which I think is really interesting. These are all guys in their second, third year with him who he's built, which means a lot of these guys are going to be back here next year and possibly even the year after. This is not a 1-year thing for Marquette. They can make this continue. But the buy-in that he has gotten from his players, and this is what we saw from Shaka Smart at VCU, but with better players and guys that fit his system. This isn't what he tried to do at Texas, where he's taking all the 5 stars and all that. No, I'm going to get the players for my system, and I'm going to pick the best players for my system, and not just the guys I can recruit at a small school, and I'm going to plug them in. I'm going to develop them. So this is a coach of the year caliber performance from Shaka Smart. Will he win it? Probably not. We'll see, but it doesn't, whether or not he gets the award, it doesn't diminish what he's done and what he means to that program.
Well, on the same note, Sean Miller's done a fantastic job at Xavier as well. And I think, were Shaka Smart not in this conversation, certainly had he not just defeated Sean Miller's squad, I think that conversation could be flipped a little bit. Miller, obviously, there's probably going to be some hesitation for voting for him just because of his history, even though a lot of that history has seemed to not be as directly related to him as it perhaps should be. But I do want to talk about Xavier a little bit and kind of what this loss does for them. They came into this game, no Zach Fremantle. He was out. Were significantly down depth-wise. Cam Kraft is out, it sounds like, for a couple of weeks. Desmond Claude was not participating in this game. They played 7 players in this really intense, hard-fought, physical game against Marquette and shot 53% from the field. To go in with 7 players, down a starter, shoot 53% from the field, and still lose, it's a chicken and the egg thing. What does this say about Xavier that they were able to do this? Or does it say more about Marquette in the sense that, hey, maybe this shouldn't have been as close of a game. Maybe Xavier shouldn't have been winning this whole game when you factor in some of that circumstances. Did you kind of get a sense that maybe this was like an otherworldly performance from Xavier to even be in this contest? Or is it just that's kind of the nature of the Big East, is they're always going to play close games no matter what the situation is?
I think Marquette just came out a little bit colder than usual, and Xavier came out as hot as they usually do. And other than that, this was about exactly what you would expect from these teams. Xavier for as amazing as Sule Boom is, he's still not a true point guard. He was a combo guard his whole career before this season, and that shows at times against a Marquette team that'll poke the ball free, and they didn't have the other options tonight. They didn't have the depth. Kunkel fouled out late too, so that hurt them. So they're down to Kiki Tandy, a guy who we basically haven't seen in the last 2 years, helping them out. Right. So I'm not worried about Xavier after this, as long as Fremantle does come back and this team gets healthy. Xavier does have one card up its sleeve right now that helps them too. Because the way the Big East tiebreakers work, if things kind of go as expected down the stretch and we end up with 4 teams in the Big East or 3 teams or whatever all tied at the top, it's likely Xavier's going to win that tiebreaker because they swept UConn, and it's likely nobody else does that. Which I think the other part that's interesting here, this win actually helps Providence of all teams, because should Creighton beat Marquette next week, Providence plays UConn. If they're able to win UConn, they'll sweep, and then they also have that same advantage as Xavier does, and Providence and Xavier then play the last week, and basically the winner of that will be in the driver's seat for the Big East. It gets really, really, really complicated here, but you lose on the road to a team like Marquette. I don't think you should be upset about that if you're a Xavier fan.
Sure. 2 losses in a row, though. Losing to Butler before that, obviously, that's a loss that's you tough. Certainly looked like to have back. Looking at the rest of the schedule for Xavier right now, they got 2 home games, DePaul and Villanova. Again, can't count anything as a victory, but nice to have DePaul at home still on the calendar. I want
to make a remark on this real quick, because that game, I just want to say, I don't think it's as much of a shoo-in as people think it is. DePaul already beat Xavier this season. DePaul won at Xavier last year. DePaul has won 3 of the last 4 meetings between these teams. So something about the Blue Demons, they've had their number. I can't see Xavier losing this one. They're a much, much better team. They're better coached. They're more talented. But you never know. It's the Big East. Things get weird. If they lose that one, they're for sure out of not just, I think, the number 1 seed race in the Big East, but probably a top 4 seed race in the NCAA tournament.
Well, even if they do beat DePaul, if they break the streak here, if they are able to kind of at least get a split against DePaul this season, they got Villanova. We know that that's not going to be an easy game, even if Kyle Neptune's team is not up to snuff as to what they've been in the past. And then you got road games at Seton Hall and at Providence. That's not easy at all. Really, really difficult games. Shaheen Holloway obviously can slow the pace down and kind of play at these grinded out defensive games that I think Xavier is capable of powering through and winning, but it's not going to be easy. Providence, that was an 85-83 game the last time these two teams played, taking them on the road. Ed Cooley is going to be ready for that team right there. Like, certainly Marquette has an easier path right now if we're looking at just those two teams in comparison, although they have Creighton. That's one of the toughest teams that they're going to face out there. But Xavier's got losing these two games in a row puts them in a much, much tougher spot as they look to try to, they finished with Butler. Hopefully they can win that one. Although again, certainly not a guarantee after losing to him last time, but it looks like, we're looking at this Xavier team thinking, oh, they're going to be a 4 seed, maybe a 5 seed. They're going to kind of be right in that conversation. And now it's like, they got some work to do.
And let's not forget, they've fallen out of NCAA tournament contention the last 3 seasons because of the way they fell apart at the end of the year. All 3 of those have come with kind of a late season loss at Providence and a late season loss to Butler. I think they've had both of those losses in each of the last 3 seasons at the end. Those are the 2 teams they play in the last week of the season. So it's setting up that's Xavier's going to have to face these demons and get over them to be the team that they're expected to be. Zach Fremantle, I think, was actually warming up a little bit today. It was expected to be 4 weeks that he'd be out, which would put him at a return for that Providence game on March 1st. So Xavier's in such an interesting position right now. It feels like they're on a knife's edge, and it can go either direction.
Last question for you. The Big East has obviously, I don't know if we're ever going to get back to the glory days of the 80s, the Patrick Ewing, Chris Mullen, the incredible time that we had back in those days. But since the new Big East has started about 10 years ago, this feels like one of the most, if not the most exciting, heart-pumping, different teams constantly being in contention. Who knows who's going to win the tournament? Who knows who's going to be the highest ranked team in the NCAA tournament or even in the AP poll? It seems like it's kind of constantly shifting, changing. Like we said, there's not really any easy games. Like, is this the most exciting Big East season that we have seen since the new Big East was started about a decade ago? And what does it kind of say about the viability long-term of this conference? Because it feels like it's in a pretty good spot right now based on how the season has gone.
It's up there. I don't know for sure if it's the most exciting because I look back 2018, they got 2 number 1 seeds out of that year. In 2020, you had kind of a mad dash to the finish before COVID happened with some real crazy games in there. And last season, I think, had a wild ending with everything that happened with Providence. So I think this is a string of really good things. And now what we're seeing is a number of programs that had built themselves up over the last couple of years that were still in the shadow of Villanova. And now that shadow is gone, all of these teams are kind of blossoming at the same time. And I think Marquette's been a good program. Now they've got the right coach. Xavier's been a good program. Now they've got the right coach. Ed Cooley has always been a fantastic coach, but I think he's gotten better. Greg McDermott has gotten better. Dan Hurley has gotten better. And all of a sudden, now that there's no Jay Wright to compete with and no automatic 2 losses for every one of these teams, the playing surface is even. I think you could take any team in the top 5 of the Big East and make a compelling argument, not just for either the best team in the conference, but for why you could see them on the 2nd or 3rd weekend in March.
Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto the show to talk some Big East hoops. It's been an exciting season in the conference. Still a couple more weeks to go. I'm excited to have an opportunity to chat with you about it again soon. Thanks again for coming on.
Anytime.
All right, that is going to do it for us today. Check back on Friday for more fantastic content previewing an excellent weekend of college basketball, talking about the ACC standings as well. Find us on YouTube if you haven't done so already. We are very, very close to 500 subscribers. Like we're basically there. So if you haven't subscribed yet, go to youtube.com, search Locked On College Basketball, hit that big red subscribe button. You can find us wherever you already get podcasts. You can leave us a review on iTunes, leave us a comment on YouTube. All of that very much appreciated as we get closer and closer to the greatest month of the year in March. Thank you again all for listening. And for now, peace out.